welcome back to another Star Mini Gaming YouTube video. This time we're doing something a little bit different. We are continuing our look at the Legions of Nagash, the Death Battle Tome for the Age of Sigmar, but this time we're going to look at the top 5 winners and losers from this release. So without further ado, let's jump right in, starting with the losers. Starting at number 5. Now this one's only on my loser list because I was excited for another death model. Even though we aren't seeing a new kit released, just one more potential unit to bring into the game was something I was excited for. And I also have this one at number 5 because although it looks bad for its point cost right now at about 320, the Bloodseeker Palanquin, the stats do not impress me. In combat, it's not terrible, it's not terrific, it's worse than a Coven Throne, in my opinion, which is what it's kind of paired up with. In terms of, if you look at the points, and it's from the same kit, it has a similar role. Its magic and its other kind of buffing abilities all specifically target heroes and have to do with heroes. So if you're fighting an enemy army and they're not bringing heroes near you, or you're not able to actually, engage an enemy hero with this unit, then you have, in essence, lost out on the majority of its benefit to your army. So currently, 5th most disappointing is the Bloodseeker Palanquin. At number 4, we have the White King with Sword. Now, I know a lot of people didn't necessarily run this model. I was a big fan of it as a support hero that you could bring because it could bring the totem, which had a range whenever you planted it of 18 inches that it would in essence bubble out and give an additional save or a ward save, if you will, of a 6-up if a model is going to lose its final wound. So if you brought a unit of skeleton warriors and they had their standard save, which was garbage, then they could have their deathless minion save, and then they could have this totem save. So on standard infantry like a skeleton warrior, you had 3 levels of save. On a zombie, for example, who originally has no save, you got 2 layers of saves. Again, they weren't amazing, but any time that you can roll more dice to just nullify all incoming damage for a unit, that's a good thing. And now that that's taken away, is a pretty big cost, at least in my mind. At number 3 on this list, we have the zombies. And now the zombies did get better, and I do want to point out that some of these units that I will be talking about will have areas strengthened in kind of contrast to the areas that they are weakened, which is why they're on this list of most disappointing to losers. But zombies can no longer merge. Their base stat line did improve by a +1/+1 in terms of their to hit and to wound. It used to be if you had 10 or more, you had a 5-up, 5-up, but if you had less than 10, it was 6s for both. Now it's just an automatic 5-up, 5-up. But and it also used to be if you had 30 or more, you got the zombies all the way to a 3-up, 3-up. Now that number is 40 or more. So to get at their optimal level, it requires more zombies, so more point investment, and you can no longer merge to take your weakened zombie units, kind of build them back up into something useful. So that was zombies at number 3. At number 2, we have the Coven Throne itself. Now there are certain areas that again did improve on this model, but the tactical insight changed, the command ability was weakened. It's no longer in essence able to win you tide priority. And the scrying pool, which used to be able to be used to affect basically any dice roll that you had to make once per game, was not limited to this model, is now limited to the model itself. So a lot of these support aspects of this model, the kind of sneaky tricks that were unique within the entire Death Grand Alliance that this model brought to bear, are no longer available to you. And at number 1 on the losers, drumroll please, we have the mighty Blood Knights. Now again, the Blood Knights did improve in some ways. We had the Castellan Commander now get a +1 attack as opposed to a +1 to hit. As a whole, the Blood Knights with their new banner ability, which is pretty uniform across death, of causing a -1 penalty to opponents' bravery whenever they're within 6 inches, is not a bad ability. There are other abilities such as the Bloodlines and the faction-specific abilities if you take allegiance to Soulblight, or if you take Neferata's allegiance There are also other good abilities that apply to them there. So there are other directions you can go. Blood Knights are still really good, don't get me wrong, but they have lost the ability now to regenerate lost models. So Death continues to lose its strongest units that have the ability to bounce back. They continue to lose the ability to do so, while some of their weaker units that are more chafe-like continue to increase. So unfortunately, the Blood Knights had to be the MVP, if you will, the number one on the greatest losers as a result of the Death Battle Tome Legions of Nagash. Now, I do want to throw in just for myself an honorable mention on this list, and that is the Necromancer. Now, the Necromancer didn't get any worse in terms of his stats. In fact, some of his abilities actually got better whenever you look at how the rest of the Grand Alliance has changed around him and how you're most likely to play the Death Grand Alliance. But for myself, the fact that you can no longer take him on a horse is a big just kind of sticking point. It obviously lowers his speed. It takes away 2 of his attacks in close combat. Not that he was ever amazing, but it did help him a little bit. You know, every little helps whenever your model is normally swinging with 1 attack on a 4-up to hit. And of course, there was the fact that I had spent hours and hours converting and painting up this beautiful model to represent my Necromancer on horseback, and that model is no longer legal. So I'll have to find some other use for it. But just for personal disappointment, the Necromancer makes the honorable mentions list on biggest losers as a result of this book. Now we go on to the good stuff here. The winners. The top 5 winners from Legions of Nagash. Starting with number 5. And this one's a bit of a stretch, but this is again more of a second order of consequences here. The Graveguard. Now the Graveguard have always been, in my opinion, overshadowed a little bit by the regular skeletons, simply because if you brought regular skeletons in large enough numbers, each individual skeleton got more attacks than a Graveguard could achieve. You could get a regular skeleton up to 4 attacks, then you could Van Hell's Dance Macabre from a Necromancer on it, so they could pile in an attack twice for a grand total of 8 attacks per battle round, which is insane. You also get more skeletons for equal points, which means more wounds that you can take. And with the ability to get up to 3 layers of saves at the time with the White King with its totem, the slightly worse save didn't really matter all that much considering the significantly greater offensive output and the fact that you got, in essence, 6 saves versus 3, and the fact that you got the 10 skeletons versus the 5 Graveguard for 80 points. Graveguard, however, now have the ability to heal just as fast as skeletons, who also had the bonus of healing D6 as opposed to D3 based upon their totems. But now, because the fact that the healing is no longer contained within the unit's profile itself, and both of these units have the summonable keyword, which is the keyword that allows your specific heroes, almost every hero in the Death Grand Alliance, to provide healing to allied summonable units within a certain range. It varies somewhat depending upon the heroes. Ordinarily, it's a D3, and then certain heroes allow you to reroll it. Certain heroes, such as Nagash, in the right circumstances, say just heal 3. But anyways, now Graveguard can heal just as fast, which means Graveguard are significantly better compared to skeletons than they used to be. Now, will I take them in large numbers over skeletons? It'll depend on the circumstances. But if you look at their points cost and you choose to cap them out, the final group of them only cost 20 points, which means it's something worth considering because you get a lot of value for your buck, so to speak, in that last iteration. But enough about them. At number 4, we have the one I consider the least exciting here, but we're going to dive into it anyways, and that is Arkhan the Black. Now, I've never been a fan of Arkhan the Black since the match play system came out, simply because he kind of did what Nagash did, just in a weaker way, and he stole all the spells that your other wizards had, and basically made the rest of your wizards pointless because you could only cast, or attempt to cast, 1 iteration of a spell per turn. And yes, Arkhan would cast it better than anybody else, but so what? You pay the points for the other wizard that is now basically useless because Arkhan is over here showing off. So Arkhan got a bit better because we now have these 2 different death magic tables that we can pick from. And whenever you take anyone from the Legion of Nagash or any of the 3 Mortarch's specific allegiances, they get to choose an additional spell from that list. Now, in addition, if you choose Arcane's specific allegiance, which of course, if you take Arcane, he has to be the general for, then you get an additional +1 to cast for all of your wizards, bringing Arcane up to a quite impressive +3 to cast on all of his spells. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't also apply to his Dispel. However, that's still quite a powerful ability. In addition, if you take the War Scroll Battalion that is specific to him and his that he's required for, then you get the added benefit of getting able to cast an additional +1 spell per turn, so he goes up to 3, and you get a +1 save versus shooting attacks, so long as you're within range of the Mortis engine that is also required for that formation. I'm sorry, that battalion. So Arcane becomes a very, very impressive wizard. He has, obviously his Curse of Years spell, which is a high risk, high potential reward spell. He has Arcane Bolt, Mystic Shield, and now he gains access to an additional spell, and he's able to cast up to 3 per turn if you choose to take him within that battalion. So really good. Arcane is suddenly a far more playable model at his points value than he used to be. Now at number 3, we have the largest one, and this is because I couldn't decide on individual one, and I decided that as a group, they benefited so much that we had to talk about them, and that is the Night Haunt. Now everyone within this faction now gets Frightful Touch. Now if you're not familiar with that, that's the ability that comes already on things like the Mortarks, or on like a Coven Throne, or a Mortis Engine, and a Spirit Host, where if you roll a 6 to hit, then you do not continue to roll any further, and the damage value that attack would output is automatically done in mortal wounds instead. And the reason I say damage output as opposed to single wound or whatever it used to be for each individual model is because that's just the quickest way I can say it for this faction. So Banshees are a D3 to wound normally. They inflict D3 mortal wounds. A Karen Wraith does 2 damage per attack. Well, now it inflicts 2 mortal wounds automatically. And Hex Wraiths, with their riders, not their horses, gain this ability as well. And so they inflict 1 mortal wound automatically as well. So suddenly we've seen the Night Haunt faction get, again, a bit more of an identity. We already had the Deep Strike ability, which was fairly unique, but now Death has a bit more of that anyways with their grave sites. We saw the Ethereal be faction-wide, which is now changed, in some ways for the better. In some ways for the worse, but I would say as a whole better. And then we've seen this new development of Frightful Touch being across the entire faction. Even the Black Coach has this ability, although they still unfortunately have not given the Black Coach Ethereal, which it desperately needs to be playable. So Night Haunt is number 3 on our winners list. Number 2, and I really, really, really wanted to put this at number 1 because these guys have never seen the gaming table for me because they used to not be able to fight their way out of a wet paper bag. But wet paper bags beware, the Black Knights can now fight their way out of you. That's right, Black Knights are my number 2 pick for greatest winners with this book. Now, quite simply, Black Knights were abysmal before. Their to hit and to wound numbers were bad. There were arguments all the times that people try to make, well, if you throw this combination with that combination on them, then in this one specific perfect storm scenario, they're halfway decent. I'd be like, yes, but you just spent 500 points to try to make a 120-point unit halfway decent in a perfect storm scenario. Don't waste your time on them. But that's changed. Now, quite frankly, they didn't have massive changes, but with the new healing abilities and the fact that you can regen summonable units more quickly than you used to be able to if you stack multiple heroes throwing their heal on them, Black Knights benefit from this. They also get +1 attack baseline as opposed to what they used to. They used to be a single attack with their lance. Now they have 2 attacks, and that lance is now on a better +1 to hit than it used to be. They still have all their other special rules where they get the bonuses on the charge. Their horse is still the same. Everything else is still the same. Their leader still gets his benefits and all too. They do cause the -1 to opponents' bravery now, like all other death units that have these banners or totems. So that's good. So Black Knights as a whole have massively improved. At 120 points, I would say they are very, very competitive, very playable for what they can now do. And as I said before, wet paper bags and maybe even not so wet, dry paper bags, beware, Black Knights are going to punch right through you. All right, and so that brings us to the number one winner, the grand winner of the Grand Alliance of Death update, and that's the Big Daddy himself, Papa Nagash. Now, Nagash has been trash, in my opinion, since the match play system came out. He was overcosted before. He didn't do anything particularly incredible. His spells were good, but somewhat limited. He only got 2 of them in terms of like his baseline. And then of course he had the 2 generic that everybody else has. And then if he was going to show off and actually, flex his magic muscles, then as I said before with Arcane the Black, he was going to be in essence neutering the rest of your magic wielders. They were going to do nothing while Nagash was over here showing off all by himself, and that has changed. Now, because of these new death magic lists that we can pick from, we now have access to more options for spells. Nagash gets to pick multiple ones. I believe it is that he gets to pick 2. Yes, he gets to pick 2. So Nagash has his 2 unique ones, plus Arcane Bolt and Mystic Shield, plus 2 other ones that he can do. And so that is 6 out of his 7 spells that he can cast per turn. And right there, like, Nagash becomes worth his points. He's 800 points right now. And the fact that he can dish out so many spells at such a terrific +3 to cast is incredible. And we could end it right there and say that's good enough. But whenever you consider the fact that he can heal himself with one of his initial unique spells, and the fact that these 2 different death magic groups that he can pick from also have different spells in which he can dish out damage or he can heal himself, allow for more flexibility. He can provide more buffs to your army via those spells or himself. And he automatically, if you take him, he gets to re-roll the D3 on the healing of units, but if you take him within his specific battalion, then he automatically heals 3 instead of the D3, which is really, really good. He gets to boost the Morghash units that you bring. Now, he himself doesn't do it, but if you take his allegiance, which you obviously would be if you're taking Nagash, I want to take that back. I apologize. I said he gets to learn 2 spells. He learns 3 spells. So boom, that's really good. Nagash just allows for so many other things to be done in terms of like benefiting your army in ways that he didn't used to, thanks to this allegiance that he can take. You get all these spells. He's casting them all out. He's dealing incredible amounts of damage on every single turn. He's flexible. He's not hampering the rest of your magic wielders from being able to do their thing. He still knows all their spells, so if they die, he knows them. If they don't die, but maybe they're in a situation where they can't really make use of their spells, he can still use them. So Nagash's flexibility is at its greatest without him having to necessarily cripple the entire rest of your force before he can reach that kind of pinnacle of power, if you will. So that's going to wrap it up. I'm certainly not disappointed in these changes. There's obviously some things that I wish had been done differently. There's some things that I'm going to have to adapt my playstyle, and I'm sure other players will as well. But the fact that Nagash is now not only playable, but something that I look forward to bringing to the table is something I'm very excited about, and I hope you are as well. So we're going to wrap it up there, and until next time, this has been James with our top 5 winners and losers of the Grand Alliance Nagash.